Hey, everybody, we are back for another episode of For Whom the Bell Tolls. Couple quick things here. I want to thank everybody who's live with us in chat. You guys are the life of the stream. Of course, if you are watching on Team Replay, you know what to do. You go down into the comments later and you write hashtag Team Replay and let me know where you're watching from, when you're watching, all that good stuff. Now, we had a little bit of technical issues beforehand. So if anybody is in the live chat cannot either see or hear myself or my guest today, who I'm going to introduce momentarily, please let us know in the chat and I'll try to figure something else out. Hopefully, I am the only one that is seeing any type of a glitch. So, being that said, I am so excited about today's episode for a couple of reasons. Number one, I have been promising our European and Asian BellTube community that I would do a daytime for me, evening time for you guys stream because you deserve it. And every time I've gone live so far, it's been like 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning or later. And I wanted to make good on this promise. And it's just the first of many to come. But second of all, and more important by far, I'm excited to welcome our guest, Matt, from Matt on Books today, because the truth is he has been hugely instrumental in so many ways for this channel. First of all, he named this TV series For Whom the Bell Tolls. This is a 100% Matt original. Well, he didn't come up with the name For Whom the Bell Tolls.
Matt.
Yeah, but it is, he certainly was the one that provided this name that I said, well, I had put up a poll and Matt had just said, no, it needs to be For Whom the Bell Tolls. And I said, yeah, Matt's right. Everyone forget the poll. Who cares? Matt's right. And Matt has helped me with technical stuff for the channel when it comes to lighting and camera work. And we're going to talk about some of that stuff today. Matt has welcomed me with open arms to his Sunday pub, and we're going to talk about that today. He has introduced me to some of my favorite BookTube personalities, and we're going to talk about that today. So we've got a lot to get to. Of course, we're going to say hi to everybody in the chat, but before we do that, Matt, at 7 p.m. your time instead of 1 or 2 in the morning your time, please let everybody know how you're doing today or tonight.
I'm doing pretty good. I wore my loudest shirt. I thought that was BellTube appropriate.
It absolutely is.
Yeah, and it's the middle of summer here, and light in the summer is always really super confusing to me. So it feels like it's like 3 in the afternoon because it's still quite light outside. But yeah, I'm doing good. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Well, it's super good to have you here. I'm going to quickly run through some of the chat real quick and we'll get going with as you guys know, I do come prepared. If I was this prepared in high school and college, I probably wouldn't be streaming from my living room right now. But let's go through.
You'd have a studio and a team, and
I would have retired like 10 years ago, and you and I would be off, on some cruise somewhere.
You could just fly to Berlin, and we could do this in a beer garden.
That's been a plan of mine that I want to do. Just need the Patreon to pick up a little bit more. But anyway, let's say hi to some people. Stepan is here from Croatia. Hi from boiling and hot Croatia coast. The Rogue, what up? The wizard himself, Andrew Wizardly Reed, swinging by to say hi. Our guest last week, the one and only Evie. Good noon and evening, guys. Alicia's here from Birdie and the Books. That's a great channel. Everybody should check it out. A Sunday Pub regular, Jerome, is here. Hi, everybody. And Andrew is complimenting you're handsome.
I think he just likes my shirt.
I think he does. Oh my God, look who's here live. See, this is why it's worth doing these in the daytime for me, because we get people like Esme who can actually show up, who's normally always Team Replay, but she is representing live. It's awesome.
Equal rights for Europeans, I say.
Absolutely. Finally, Team Live instead of Team Replay from Horrendous. Vero, hi. And we've got K2U3. Hello, Brian and Matt. Hello to you. Evie, thank you for that update. That's awesome. I think, Matt, that means that it's my Mac problem, not StreamYard or my camera or anything else. So we'll be taking a collection at the end of the stream. We'll be passing the virtual plate for a new computer. I'm kidding. It's no Fitzy appearance. We might talk about that.
Yeah,
Um,
Fitz is right now hiding on top of the bookshelf, pretty far away, but we'll see if she comes over. Yeah.
we have the Mutual Rules Association here, where Andrew is saying that Esme rules, and Esme is saying that Andrew rules, and I agree with both. Okay.
I'd say Esme rules more, just
Oh,
a little bit. I
I
mean, I
mean,
like Andrew, but Esme's like, yeah.
I'd even go further and say she rules way more, but this is being, recorded on the interwebs forever. And,
Yeah,
far
we
be
don't.
it for me to ever suggest that,
No.
the DNF king himself, as compared to somebody who reads as many books as he does, but finishes them. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah.
so we got a lot to talk about today. And it's funny because Matt and I have tons in common. We are of the same age. We grew up in the same generation. And I haven't really been able to have anybody other than, I'm going to say, probably Philip, that's been on the show, that there are just certain things that we can relate to because we lived through them. And those are things like the books that we grew up with, in the mid 80s, or, the 90s prevalence of these big series that were all of a sudden coming out that most of you guys probably weren't even born yet or were just born. So we've got lots to talk about. And we're going to, oh, John, too. You're right, Andrew. What about John?
There
How could,
there are a few graybeards. I mean, like you and I are the oldest as far as I know, like of our sort of the group
yeah.
that we're all friends with, but John's not too far away, Mike's not too far away. Philip's a little younger than us, but still, yeah.
John's actually, I'm not gonna speak for John, but if you find out
Is he
he's a
is he
little old,
older?
yeah, I'm not gonna say about my booktube brother in the South, but
Okay, I thought he was a little younger than me, but yeah.
I think it's his energy.
Yeah.
We come off like, I mean, look at me. I'm like, I would use the adjective disheveled, but there's a much bigger booktuber that calls himself disheveled. But this is about as disheveled as I get. You look great today.
I look like I'm retired on a beach,
Oh,
so,
it's
you know.
it's a great look for you. So I want to talk about books. I want to talk about your life. I want to talk about some of your experiences. I know a lot of people here are here for book content, but one of the things that I like to do on this show is to dive a little bit deeper into the personalities that we see on camera. And sometimes it's nice because it allows our guests to share some things with the people that watch this stream that maybe aren't really great content for their own show, right? They're doing a TBR or they're reviewing a book and they maybe don't want to get into the weeds so much about life in general. So I think that this can be a great opportunity for people like Matt and myself. And I just want to start kind of with a common question, and that is really, what was your first fantasy book, or what sparked your passion for reading fantasy in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, this is something where I'm always going to be extremely grateful to my mother.
Okay.
My mother read a lot. My mother encouraged me to read a lot. She was a big Stephen King fan, and when I was 9, she gave me a box set, the silver anniversary box set of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings.
Wow.
And I don't really remember anything much what I was reading before the Lord of the Rings. I know I'm pretty sure I was in the library at school, and maybe I'd picked up some Narnia or something. But the thing that really stuck with me was Lord of the Rings, because it was like the first. I'm pretty sure it was the first like adult novels that I ever owned myself.
Sure. Like
You
they were
know,
yours and you
they
knew
were
that they were
mine, and I
yours.
could just read them over and over again. And I've read now Lord of the Rings at least 12 times, but I
Jeez.
sort of lost count, so it's probably more.
Right.
I used to have a thing I would read it every autumn or every second autumn.
Okay.
It was always kind of an autumn book for me. So yeah,
It
very
kind of does feel like an autumn read.
yeah. For me, it was always kind of an autumn winter kind of read, and I've just been rereading it. I did a video about all of the editions I own because I got into like collecting cool, nicer editions at some point.
Sure.
Um, And yeah, no, that was definitely the most influential. And then I went on, as you did when you were a kid in the 70s and 80s. You're like, I read Tolkien. What do I do now? So I read Shannara, of
Hmm.
course, and I read the Belgariad, of course, because everybody was ripping off Tolkien back in the
Yeah,
day. And it was like, okay, this isn't as good, but it feels kind of like Tolkien. Somehow I never, hey, Darko,
love
somehow
Darko.
I never got into the Wheel of Time, which sort of sets me apart from a lot of people, because Wheel of Time seems to be insanely popular, and I don't really understand why.
Well,
Um,
I think, and we can talk about this, but I think that when Wheel of Time was publishing, I was not interested in it either.
okay.
Like you, I would go to bookstores. This is before Amazon, and e-commerce was a thing. You wanted a book, you go to the bookstore, and you'd start to see these Robert Jordan books start to pile up and line up on the shelves, but I had no interest in them whatsoever. I mean, it took me to 2021 to even pick up Eye of the World.
I don't
So
even remember being aware of them to ignore them. It
really,
wasn't it wasn't that like I knew they were out there and I chose not to read them. I don't even remember being aware of them until about 5 or 10 years ago.
really,
Um, I just missed them somehow. And
how?
maybe because I pretty quickly got to the point where I was like, Terry Brooks isn't it.
Hmm.
Shannara is not that good.
Hmm.
The Belgariad is pretty predictable. I think it's great. I think it's one of the best maybe introductions to fantasy.
Sure.
Um, because it's so tropey. It just like covers everything. But it's also not great, especially compared to Tolkien.
Yeah.
And I just started moving into other things. And I mean I've always read a lot of fantasy, but also science fiction.
Gotcha.
So I've
Would
been going back and forth a lot.
were you born in the States?
Yeah.
You
Yeah. I was born in Washington, DC.
you're born in DC, and then when did you move to Australia?
When I was 9.
Okay. So
Yeah.
really when you were reading, you were already in Australia. When you're reading fantasy, you were there
Yeah.
already.
Yeah. It's actually one of my first lasting memories in Australia is
Okay.
like in our very first house,
Yeah.
our very first Christmas was
Yeah.
when my mother, or my very first birthday, actually, my mother gave me this silver anniversary box set of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And I remember that really, really clearly. It was like it was our first house in Australia, which was a pretty weird place actually.
Sure.
And I got those books.
How did you end up in
So
Australia? I mean,
my mother
yeah.
worked for the CIA,
Okay.
and
No
so
wonder
we
my screen is garbled. Oh my god, this is
exactly
all
that's
making
why.
sense now.
Yeah, that's why my
Yeah.
video stream never works. No, she worked for the CIA, and she was posted to the American Embassy in Australia.
Okay. So
So we were a single mother and
sure.
child family. I don't have any brothers or sisters.
Okay.
She divorced my father, or they divorced when I was 2.
Okay. So
So
that's
I
really what you remember. I mean, you're not going to remember much before you're 2.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I don't remember ever seeing my parents in the same room.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Because I was 2
Sure.
when Mom and I moved.
Yeah.
So my dad lived in Florida, so I spent a lot of time in Florida, going back and forth visiting him and stuff. But yeah, we moved to Australia when I was 9.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you I mean it would be hard to know, but like at what age were you going to bookstores, in Australia?
Uh, like by myself.
Well, either being taken or by yourself. I just wonder
Oh, I
like
think I think my mom was taking me to bookstores when I was 9 or 10.
okay.
Yeah, but I
So
was obviously like she gave me those books, which are like The Hobbit's a bit more kid oriented, but I chewed through Lord of the Rings when I was
sure.
9. So I'm sure
I
she was taking me to bookstores.
I wonder because, I mean, right now, distribution for books is everywhere. It doesn't matter where you live. But I do wonder, like in the early 80s, if the shelves in Australia had the same stuff as they did here in Minneapolis.
Probably not. I
Yeah.
mean, back in the like we moved to Australia in 1979,
Okay.
and then and through the 80s, we had family send us care packages from America
Right.
because there were things in America that we missed that you couldn't get in Australia.
Okay, so like what? Tell us like what, because
Um,
this is interesting to me.
Oreos.
Okay, see, everybody takes
Um,
Oreos for granted, right? I
well,
mean, yeah.
nowadays, like
Now,
you can
yeah,
get
of course.
Oreos everywhere in the world.
Everywhere.
I can get them
Right.
here in Germany. You can get them
Right.
in Australia. But back in the early 80s, like Oreos, Tang,
Okay.
which was a common kids drink back in those
It's
days.
because we all wanted to be
Um,
astronauts, right?
yeah,
And that's
exactly. It was the
yeah,
astronaut drink.
yeah.
Like I grew up before we went to Australia. I grew up going to the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., part of
Okay.
the Smithsonian Institution. The Air and Space Museum, this was the best thing about the Air and Space Museum when I was a kid. They had a gift shop where you could buy astronaut food,
Very cool.
like the same kind of food that they ate on
Yep.
Apollo missions.
And they came in pouches because
And they came in pouches.
my
and
family
like,
used to make those pouches. So yeah.
oh, that's how you got into your flask thing?
Yes, correct.
Ah, okay. Interesting.
We used to have government deals for NASA and the DEA and
Cool.
other agencies, and that was one of our customers is for those astronaut foods. Yeah.
The Air and Space Museum in DC, you can still go there and you can still get it. I was there a couple of years ago, and you get little vacuum sealed
Mm-hmm.
package of ice cream, and astronaut ice cream is basically it's like a soft solid.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't look anything like ice cream. It's not cold, obviously,
Yeah.
but when you put it in your mouth, it kind of melts and
Sure.
tastes just like ice cream. It's
Yeah.
really cool. So that was a big thing in my childhood. I wanted to go to the Air and Space Museum every chance I could get. Yes, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've probably ruined the chances of this video actually going anywhere on YouTube by saying CIA more than once.
I don't know. I mean,
Uh,
it could look, it's my channel. You never know. It could get one view, it could get 15,000 views. It's impossible. I have given up trying to figure out,
Yeah,
how
I
this works.
doing this for views
Yeah.
is a mystery. Yeah.
Yeah, but okay, so we were talking about, before I interrupted about what kinds of things you couldn't get in Australia. I wonder in some regard if some of the books that I was reading when we were the same age, say 12, 13, may have been different just because the selections were different. Like I'm
Yeah.
sure Lord of the Rings was here, but my parents were not, fantasy readers at all. My dad's not a reader at all. My mom is, but more just contemporary fiction types of
Yeah.
stuff. And when I was a kid, she really wasn't a reader. She was just more social with her friends. So,
My memory of what I was reading starts a lot or becomes a lot clearer after we moved back to the US. Like we went over there when I was 9. We moved back when I was 16.
okay, because that was going to be the next question was,
Yeah.
so you were there for 7 years.
Yeah.
That is this why you don't have an Australian accent?
I do. Depends on who I'm talking to.
Okay.
And like if I go back to Australia, I have a pretty thick Australian accent, like
It
immediately
just immediately pops back.
talking to friends. Yeah. And it comes and goes. I've been at parties where people were like, "So where are you from? South Africa or Ireland?" Or
Sure.
people, because I have a bit of an odd accent. It's not just clearly American or clearly Australian or anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that is why my accent isn't as clearly one thing or the other as it possibly could be. I mean, years later, when I was 23, I went back to Australia and lived there for a number of years again, and then moved to Germany. So yeah, it's been, I think it was more time total in Australia than in America.
Gotcha.
Maybe.
Yeah. And
Or about equal. Probably about equal.
although some of the more formative years were in the United States, right? Because if you were like you said like 9 to 16, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that could have been part of it too. And that's peak mid 80s, folks, for those that are paying attention.
Yeah. 79 to 86 ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you somebody that in the mid 80s appreciated the music for what it was, or were you like me and
Fuck, I hated it.
same here? I only wanted
Oh
to
my
listen
God.
to 70s music and 60s music.
I was
mostly
listening
70s.
to 60s and 70s and punk.
Yeah.
and rap.
Yeah. Didn't you
I
hate the
I
'80s
was
when we lived through it in terms of the music?
I was looking for anything that wasn't Duran Duran or Flock of Fucking Seagulls.
Right.
Like all of that stuff, I hated it.
Yeah.
I was listening to older stuff. Some of the stuff from the 80s, like The Cure, I was into The Cure. But a lot of the stuff I was listening to was like Rolling Stones, Jethro Tull,
Sure.
Pink Floyd,
Yep.
pre 80s.
Yeah.
Or it was the stuff that was on the side, like was not so mainstream in the 80s, like punk and rap.
Right. I mean,
Um,
you were there for Run DMC's first records, so, I mean,
exactly. Exactly.
and
And
that was
that
that was great.
interested me. That I was
Yeah.
like, okay, these guys have actually got rhythm. They're writing really quite amazing poetry in a way. And they're not wearing those hairstyles and those pastel colors. So I was
Yeah.
just like, yeah, this is great. I'm into it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, mainstream music in the 80s, most of it was garbage,
Did
if you
you
ask me.
have you changed your opinion on that as the years have gone on? Because I have. Like, now I can listen to Duran Duran and I enjoy it. I like a bunch of '80s music that when I was living through it, I hated it. Or do you just
Yeah.
just
Yeah. I like back then, I definitely hated it. Nowadays I hear it and it's kind of a nostalgia thing
Yeah, yeah, it
because
brings it
even
back.
though it wasn't the music that I loved, it was everywhere. Like this is back in the days before Spotify,
Right.
and to have like all the music you heard back then was either being played in a club,
Yep.
and I was a bit too young for clubs in the early 80s,
Yep, same here.
um, or it was on the radio
Yeah.
or television. Well, it wasn't much music on television, but it was being played on the radio, and the radio was everywhere. That was the source of music. And I like you couldn't get around it. Even if you hated it, you heard Duran Duran all
Oh
the
my god,
time.
the
You know?
American Top 40, with Casey Kasem,
Yeah.
was like, eh, and all the top 40 channels. I mean, you could go up and down the FM dial, in the '80s, and you were just getting one top 40 channel after the next. I mean, yeah, I don't know how many times I heard "Born in the USA" in 1984, on the radio, but it had to be several thousands.
Yeah. And actually I came out of it actually quite liking Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah,
I always kind of liked him quite a lot. I never really liked that song very much, but he
yeah.
did a lot of stuff that was much better than that.
Yeah, I like him as a
Um,
storyteller,
yeah.
and maybe some of his deeper cuts that never really made radio. Those I think are of interest to me, but I think in some regard we have storyteller types of tastes, both in obviously books, but
I
in
can't
music.
I can't listen to music that has garbage lyrics.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
so there is some music that, yeah, okay, I'd be happy to dance to it because it's got a good rhythm or whatever, and
hmm
the lyrics are kind of meaningless. But I've always really been into lyrics,
hmm
and first of all, that's one of my two superpowers.
Okay,
I remember lyrics to any song that I like that I've heard more than 3 times.
I love that. That's so
Uh,
cool.
and I mean, it can be I haven't heard the damn thing for 10 years,
Yeah,
and it'll come on somewhere and I can sing along with the whole thing. I remember lyrics. I don't know why. I wish I could remember anything else as well as I can remember lyrics.
isn't that weird how that just
Um,
sinks into your mind?
yeah, it's just something about the rhythm and whatever. I can't quote lyrics
Sure, but
like
if it's
just off the top
playing,
of my head, but if
if
it's
it's playing,
playing,
you
I
know it.
know all the lyrics. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
What's the other superpower? You said you
oh,
had 2.
I can stop my hiccups
That is a pretty good
like
superpower.
instantly. Yeah.
Wow.
I learned it.
Okay.
I learned it from a shiatsu master or masterin
Okay.
woman. I had hiccups once. I was at her place. She came over and she just put her thumb in the middle of my back somewhere,
Okay.
and my hiccups were just gone, like completely, instantly gone.
Wow.
And ever since then, I am able to disbelieve in my hiccups.
I like that. You just don't acknowledge that they exist.
Well, they start, and
Yeah.
I just convince myself that I don't have hiccups, and I don't.
The mind's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. But yeah, I was just thinking about what you're talking about with these song lyrics, and yeah, and I think that that's why we like some of the same bands. You know, you mentioned Pink Floyd and Jethro Tull, and
Yeah.
I had asked you in a Discord message one day, or it was Sunday Pub. Do you like Dire Straits? And I think your answer was, "Am I
Oh yeah.
not human?"
Yeah.
So I
Of
mean,
course. Of course I like Dire Straits.
yeah.
I
So
mean, they did a lot of stuff. Like there were people making music in the 80s that wasn't garbage.
right. They
You know.
and I'd throw them in,
Yeah.
as one of them.
Exactly.
And I think Hall and Oates were doing some cool things rhythmically
Yeah.
that even though they were top 40, they've kind of lasted, the test of time,
Yeah.
so to speak. But anyway, so to get back to a couple of questions here, I know that and you and I have talked about some of your outside interests beyond the books. And I know one of them is, well, a couple of them are both photography and design.
Yeah.
Can you share with us for some of us who are watching that maybe don't know anything about your background as, a designer or
Yeah.
your eye for photography? Because I think it's compelling for people to get to know you better.
Sure. I actually, when I was a kid, I wanted to be an artist. Probably painter, but
Okay.
I did everything. I was kind of I guess art wise, I was a bit of a child prodigy.
Awesome.
I had art shows when I was 14 with adult artists.
Awesome.
Um,
And what
where
medium were you painting? Were
I
you
was painting, but
okay?
I mean, I did a lot of drawing. I have lots and lots of old sketchbooks that are just full of drawings. Um, enjoy your walk, Esme.
Yes.
Um, yeah, no, I was doing a lot of drawing, and when I sort of got into my early teen years, I started painting. I was doing a lot of painting. We had a house, luckily, that had a basement that I could use where I could just sort of set up a studio and leave it. So I painted a lot. I won art awards when I was in high school. I had solo exhibitions when I was in high school. All sorts of stuff going on. I got selected for a special governor's school thing where they sent talented kids off for summer where you did sort of university level classes,
Very
and that
cool.
was all focused on art.
And where was that? So that was in the States. So where did you
That
go for
was
that?
that was in Virginia, Northern
Okay.
Virginia.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I got to university, I discovered that almost everybody was better than me.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. I went
Like objectively better or subjectively better?
um I a couple of people were absolutely objectively better than me.
Yeah.
Like I remember a particular guy that I was in painting classes with, and I was like, this dude feels like he's like 10 years ahead of me as far as just skill, you know.
Sure.
Also talent and ideas and stuff. But I had a really hard time in university with painting, and I also did some sculpture and also did some interesting things, but I kind of always felt like I was a bit behind, and it was probably just that I kind of lost the passion for it. I didn't have as much motivation anymore, and I dropped out. I dropped out of university for a year.
Do you think it was because like you saw something that seemed maybe like more unattainable with somebody having, a different degree of talent that was discouraging, or were you just legitimately finding other interests that this
I,
became less interesting?
I think I was spoiled,
Okay.
actually, because I had been where I was, like when I was in high school and amongst my friends and pretty much my whole world in my teenage years, I was the far and away the most talented artist,
Hmm.
so it was kind of easy to just do whatever I wanted, and people seemed to think it was good.
Yeah.
And in university, that shit don't fly.
Yeah.
Like they're looking at it and they have very clear, concrete, objective reasons to think that you're doing something good or you're not. You know, if
Um,
you think,
it's big
if,
fish in a small sea versus,
yeah,
small fish in a pretty larger sea. Yeah.
yeah, I was kind of the only fish,
Yeah.
and then I was one of very many fish, and I was kind of in the middle.
Sure.
It wasn't that I suddenly became bad. I was still
Right.
good,
Right.
but I was surrounded by a bunch of very talented people and being judged by some very talented teachers.
Sure.
And I had a hard time with it. I didn't do so well with it, and I dropped out.
Okay.
Worked in an art supply store for a year,
Okay.
and thought about it, and went back and changed my major to design
Interesting.
because I knew that my creative talent could be applied to something. Well, the other thing was also when I was an artist, I met a lot of artists,
Hmm.
like older working artists, and almost every single one of them was unhappy and bitter and poor.
Yeah. I think that
And
happens a lot. I think
yeah,
that, you run into authors that feel that way after, especially back then when there was no self-publishing, right? And these people have been trying to get, real trad publishers forever. And instead they're writing for the local, newspaper and, for as a
yeah.
freelancer, and you get a
Yeah.
little kind of bitter and disgruntled with their own life choices kind of people that can rub off.
The thing that kind of killed the idea for me of being an artist in the future was meeting a bunch of artists who were all pretty much suffering, and meeting a bunch of people in the art world, like gallery owners
Hmm.
and stuff like that. And it's a really cutthroat business.
Oh, absolutely.
And the way most artists, painters especially, the way you get somewhere as a painter is you play a social and political game very well.
Yeah.
You don't paint very well. You
Right.
can be crap at painting,
Yeah.
but you're good at going to the right parties and talking to and sucking up to the right people,
That's right.
and you can get somewhere. And another guy who is objectively a better painter, who's shy, he's starving,
Right.
you know?
I mean, but that I think that that's just the sad nature of, the world that we live in is that merit
Absolutely.
is only a piece of the puzzle when it comes to success.
Yeah.
I have a good friend of mine. I've been very, very close with him since I was about 5 years old, and his family is huge in the art world all over the
Right.
world. They own a huge gallery here. He is a certified art appraiser from Christie's and Sotheby's.
Wow. Okay.
He knows fine art. He deals fine art. All of this. They bring him in as expert witnesses during divorce trials
Oh,
when the
right.
husband and the wife are fighting over the art, and they bring
Okay.
him in to, say what these assets are worth.
Interesting.
But he has said something very similar, numerous times in the past, in that, yeah, I mean, it's art world is cutthroat because it is so niche. A lot of people have no clue how much like corporate America it really can be.
Yeah.
And a lot of true creatives aren't prepared for that because they
If
think that
you're just a painter, you are going to get chewed up and spit out,
yeah,
you know, unless you know how to play that game. And I was aware of that game,
hmm,
but I was also very aware of not wanting to actually play it. Like I saw my future life
sure,
going to gallery openings and meeting older artists and stuff. I was like, okay, if I really push this with painting, I could
hmm,
probably end up pretty good, and I might be able to sell stuff. But what am I going to have to do? And I was
sure.
looking at all of these people and the way the game worked, and I was just like, oh god, this looks like a nightmare.
At that time in your life, were you, more introvert or extrovert or a combo? Where would you say you kind of were on that personality?
More introverted.
More
I still
introvert.
am
Yeah.
officially. A lot of people probably don't believe me, but I am actually. I am a high functioning introvert.
Yeah.
Put it that way. I am
Yeah.
actually an introvert who is perfectly happy spending an entire day alone reading,
Sure.
but I can function with people pretty well.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'll never disagree with anybody's self-assessment of themselves, but I know some real introverts and they couldn't have a YouTube channel, nor could they come on,
Sure.
a show
Yeah.
and do something or create their own content and throw it out to the world
Yeah.
because of security issues, just like an insecurity issue. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of us that are readers, and especially those of us who spend a lot of time by ourselves, because I think you and I are like that in a big regard, it gets, we can talk ourselves into that we're introverts sometimes more than we are. I don't know, but I'll take
Yeah.
it. I'll take it your word on it. But I do think you're, if
I
you
mean,
are an
certainly,
introvert,
certainly,
you're very high functioning.
yeah, certainly at university time, I was spending a lot of time feeling uncomfortable at parties,
Okay.
because I mean, you could be such an introvert, maybe to a really unhealthy level, where you go to university and you don't go to any parties, you
Right.
know. I wasn't that. I
Yeah.
was meeting people, talking to people. I'd get invited to a party and I'd go to a party and I'd usually feel really uncomfortable
Okay.
because like being surrounded by a whole bunch of people having fun and you don't know any of them.
Yeah.
I was just like, I don't know what to do.
Cocktails.
Um, yeah.
That's
Obviously
that's what
not.
worked for me at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I mean, I also discovered drugs and
Yeah.
drinking,
Yeah.
and tried everything.
Yeah.
And that worked. That worked pretty well. Like
For
if
a
you get a bit
while.
drunk, yeah,
Yeah.
if you get a bit drunk or you're on something, then you tend to be a bit more open to people and a bit more or less concentrated on yourself and being uncomfortable. So that
Yeah.
helped. But
Yeah, I mean, and folks, we are not here as I look into the camera to suggest that that is behavior you should do. Matt and I grew up at a very different time where some of those non-weed type of drugs were exactly what they were claimed to be. These days, it's not the case at all, and I am very strong proponent of not doing any of that just because you
yeah,
don't know what it is, and it's
yeah,
different today than it was there. I wanted to look in the camera and tell you guys that because I think
yeah,
it's super important. And you do hear about people all the time thinking they're doing one thing and they're doing something totally different and they die. So it's just not, it ain't the 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s anymore. And I think
no,
we need to we need to recognize that. So, but you did get to parties, and you finally had some some decent times, at least breaking through your shell there.
yeah.
So
But
when
I mean, the original question was about design and photography.
yeah, yeah, I mean,
I
we go off topic here. You know how this is.
I dropped out for a year. I went back and I was like, okay, I know I want to do something creative, but I'd like to do something where I would actually have a relatively good chance of earning money.
Hmm.
And I don't necessarily need to be rich, but I also don't want to be miserable. So I went back and changed my major to design.
Okay.
And
So
that actually
what
worked
kind?
pretty well.
Let me interrupt. So is design a major, or is it like a specific type of design?
Yeah, I mean, when you say design, it
Yeah.
could mean industrial design where
Right.
you're designing physical products.
Right.
Mine was communication arts and design. So it was
Okay.
much more focused on graphic design, print design, but also digital design was becoming a thing.
Sure.
And I was so lucky. I feel like work wise, I've always been mostly just lucky because I was really interested in digital design and I was in university as the web was invented,
Yeah. Yeah.
basically. And I became the expert in my university on the web because the web
Very
was
good.
this totally brand new thing. Like the
Yeah.
internet existed.
Yep.
The internet had been around for a decade and a half,
Yep.
but the web, not many people think of the internet and the web as separate things anymore, but like
Yeah.
the internet is the backbone of how this communication stuff gets passed around between computers.
Yep.
The web is a very specific thing, which is part of the internet. And I landed in university just as the web was really becoming a thing. And I got super into it and taught myself everything there was to know about it, which at the time wasn't very much. It was pretty easy. You could teach yourself online.
Sure.
Nobody in my university could teach me much about it. I ended up teaching classes about it later.
Cool.
And I was really into virtual reality. And I scammed the dean of my department
Okay.
into funding a virtual reality lab. I mean,
Really?
I wasn't scamming him. I thought it was actually a worthwhile thing back in, the mid 80s, which was way
Yeah,
too early for it to be a worthwhile thing.
right.
But
But the
I thought it
fact
was
you,
really interesting. And I
yeah,
told him it was going to be the future. And I got him to invest a fair bit of money into the kinds of gear we would need to do virtual reality things.
and that do you attest any of that to having, that surrounding of the design environment in those classes, that your
Yeah.
mind was thinking in terms, of VR and in ways that your design could influence, this new technology that was so, I mean, not even in an infant stage yet, really just
Yeah.
conceptual for the most part.
Yeah. It would, I mean, I was reading a lot. So it wasn't necessarily the environment because like nobody in my environment was into VR.
Right.
Like nobody else was interested in it. Everybody else thought I was crazy.
Sure.
But I was reading a lot of stuff, a lot of which was pretty old stuff. Actually,
Sci-fi stuff, yeah.
there was well, not sci-fi, but like
Okay.
actual VR research and theory. But it was
Okay.
older. Like nobody knows about these guys anymore. But one of the big guys that I was super into was Myron Kruger, who was a professor at University of North Carolina,
Okay.
and he was doing VR theory and VR-ish things in the 70s already
Jeez.
with really primitive computers. And no, I mean, the internet wasn't there at all. And he was doing really interesting things and writing about them. So
Okay.
I was reading about him. I was going to conferences. I also convinced the university to pay for me to go to conferences,
I
which was
love
pretty cool.
that. See,
Yeah,
I don't know, man. It's like, this is what I hear, it's like in the last 5 minutes, we've talked about you were able to get the dean to fund a VR before VR existed. You were getting, them to pay you to go to conferences. You're okay at sales, my man. I
yeah,
really think you are. Um, y-
maybe, yeah,
somebody that age doesn't just, have that happen without a little bit of, um, persuasion ability, so to speak.
yeah. I mean, I think I've certainly learned a hell of a lot more about that. I've done a lot of sales
Yeah.
in
And
design since then.
yeah,
But yeah, no, it never really occurred to me that that is kind of uncommon, I guess, for a university student. Um,
very.
yeah. So
I,
I did all of that. And I was also very into photography in university.
yeah,
Um, but back then, I mean, digital photography didn't exist.
right.
It wasn't even an idea yet. It was film. And I was in the darkroom all the time developing black and white film and doing prints and all that sort of stuff. I miss that. I really miss having a digital, a black and white darkroom.
Sure.
When I first moved to Germany, which was many years later, we had a flat with a basement, which is
Okay.
really rare to have your own private basement in any building in Germany. We had a really weird flat, and I turned the basement into a dark room, which was awesome.
Cool.
So for a while, I had a dark room, but once I got really into digital, it's really hard not to become lazy.
Sure.
It's so easy to like take your little card and stick it in the computer and bring up your picture on the screen and edit it in Photoshop and email it to someone and they can see it, rather than spending hours and hours in a darkroom and doing like 10 different prints of one picture just to see
Yeah.
what the right contrast is and whatever.
Yeah.
That stuff was really fun. I loved it, but it just takes so much time.
It
It's so involved.
it does. And it's interesting because I think that there's probably some nostalgia to it too, where if all of a sudden you had a basement again, or all of a sudden you had an extra room on your flat, that was the perfect, space to do a dark room.
Yeah,
I bet you'd probably still do it. I wonder how much you'd actually use it, because I just wonder if the
that's the
idea
thing.
of doing it is more
Yeah,
attractive than the doing of it now.
even like it's still pretty rare. I met a guy when I lived in Hamburg in Germany. I met a guy coincidentally. A guy opened a shop on my street. And the first time I walked by, he had all these beautiful black and white photo prints hanging in the front window, and there was just his name on the door.
And that was it.
And I was looking around for a sign. I was like, "What is this place?" And I looked in one day and I saw him sitting in there by himself. And I just knocked and I was like, dude, what do you do? And he was like, oh, I'm a photo printer. And this was like in the 2000s already.
Okay. So it's a little,
And I was
yeah,
like,
it's a little
you,
passe at that point, right?
you can survive on printing photos. And he was like, I mean, yeah, I don't make a lot of money, but and it turned out he was one of the top 10 photo printers in the entire world, and famous photographers sent him film
Oh my gosh.
to print for them,
And you
you
just
know.
randomly ran across it.
And he just opened a little tiny shop in my street, and I became friends with him. I started hanging out with him and checking out his techniques and everything. It was really, really interesting. Larry. And Larry he was doing great on it for himself, but he had a name. He'd been doing
Right.
it for like 30 years already,
Right.
and people knew him. And there were famous photographers all over the world that were like, I don't let anyone print my work except Larry.
Got it. Was he
It's like,
born and
okay.
raised in Germany, or
He was an American.
he's American?
Yeah,
Okay.
he was an American, and he had moved to Germany years before. I don't know why, and set up
Set up
business.
shop. To the average person like myself or anybody who's watching, is there a difference in looking at an analog, you know, print of a photo versus digital? And what is that, if there is, or could we even tell at this point?
On a screen, you couldn't tell.
Yeah.
It doesn't really make any difference. If you saw an enlargement, like a photo print of film
Okay.
next to a digital print, you probably at first glance you wouldn't be able to tell. Like, most people don't pay close enough attention to the details in something like that
Sure.
to really be able to tell. But I mean, the big difference between digital and analog is analog has grain,
Sure.
right? There is a there well, what film is it's coated with a whole bunch of particles, right, which react differently to chemicals and light.
Mm-hmm.
And when you shine light through it to make a print, those particles leave a texture in the picture, and that's
Gotcha.
called film grain. And there, for me, there is a subconscious, without even looking really, really, really closely, there is a subconscious
That you could see it.
feeling to
Yeah.
grain.
Yeah.
It feels analog somehow.
Okay.
And when you really look closely at it, you can see it super clearly. But if you're good at digital printing, you can put grain into digital photos.
Right. Right. I mean,
I've done it, like I have some images which are very, very high resolution scans of a film exposure with no picture. It's basically just an exposure of a white wall or a gray wall or whatever. And
Sure.
that functions as a grain layer that you can layer into a digital picture.
Very cool.
And then if you're printing at high enough quality, you
It-
can. I don't think there's that much difference anymore. I think most
Sure.
people who are insisting on shooting film these days, it's just the nostalgia and the feeling of it, the physicality of it.
And the
Quality
time
wise,
and the time spent in a dark room, maybe.
yeah, the
you know.
craft, and
Yeah.
there really is something to that process. It's kind of magical.
It really
But
is. I mean, it's
yeah,
like there are a few things that blow me away in terms of inventions, and the camera is absolutely one of them. Um,
absolutely.
the fact that somebody came up with a way to do this, and so long ago, before there was cars, right? And
Yeah.
before just a handful of very smart people have affected the world in immeasurable ways over the
If
last
you look
couple
at some
hundred
of the
years.
old guys, the old photographers, like Ansel Adams was
Yeah,
one that I got really into. I've got a number of his photo books. He was taking a camera that was literally this big.
yeah,
Yeah, it was a huge box with a huge heavy tripod, and he was strapping it to a mule
exactly.
and hiking for days into these places like Yellowstone and whatever,
Yeah,
back before they were super civilized nature parks, and camping out to go put this thing together. And he had like 10 or 20 plates. He didn't have rolls of film like like I did
Yeah,
in my little camera. He had
right.
glass plates,
Yeah,
and he had a box with 20 glass plates. And it's like, I'm going to go shoot 20 photos, and one of them is going to be good,
yeah.
maybe.
I
You
wonder how
know,
many mules he went through.
yeah, it's crazy the way that photography developed, and now with digital, I mean, I can shoot a photo, and someone on the other side of the world can have it seconds later. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
from your
Yeah,
phone, which
yeah,
is
exactly.
essentially a supercomputer,
Yeah,
with all the knowledge in the world. I mean, when we were growing up, I mean, honest to God, if you think about the year that you graduated high school and I were to tell you, hey, at some point you are going to have something that fits in your pocket that basically contains all the known, recorded
everything.
information on planet Earth and beyond, you'd have looked at me going, not a chance. Um,
When I was I think I was 6 or 7, so really little, Matt. My dad was a computer programmer, um, and my dad took me with him to the office when I was visiting once. And he's sitting up in his office, and he's doing stuff, and he's got his green screen in front of him, and he's doing stuff, and I'm playing with punch cards,
sure.
right?
Yeah, because that's what you
I'm
used.
drawing
Yeah.
on punch cards. For those of you who don't know what punch cards were long, thin cardboard,
Yeah.
and they were all a uniform size and shape, and they had a bunch of holes punched in them, and each of those holes, or each of those cards, was one line of computer code. And when you wanted to tell the computer what your program was, you would take a stack, meters tall stack sometimes, and you'd feed it through a reading machine. It would read all those holes and put everything into the computer.
Yeah.
So I was drawing on punch cards to spend my time, and I went to my dad and I was like, "So how does your computer work?" And he was like, "What? Oh, this isn't the computer."
It's the reader.
I was like, what is it?" Well, it was a green screen, and he was
Oh, yeah.
typing. He had a keyboard and a monitor, and he was typing, and he said, "Oh, this isn't the computer." I was like, "Okay, so what's the computer?" He said, "Come with me." He took me down to the basement, and the basement was this white space with like fluoro lights and a white floor and refrigerator sized
Oh,
machines
yeah.
standing around. It was really loud. It was really cold. And he said,
Yeah.
this is the computer.
Yeah.
And I didn't really get it as a kid, of course.
Right.
Like, how do you sit in your office? Like, but that was a computer, and it wasn't 1/10 as powerful as my phone.
Oh, yeah,
That
not
whole
even
basement,
close. Yeah, not
you
even
know.
close, it
Yeah.
took an entire room. Yeah, I do
Yeah.
remember those. I remember those punch cards. I had to take a statistics class in business school it was in university, and they actually used those punch cards, for the statistics information. Very, very strange. So I
Yeah.
have very clear memories of that. I want to jump in, and again, we're all over the place, which is exactly what I want this show to be. So
Yeah.
half of the questions on my list we're never going to get to, which is totally cool because
Yeah.
I like how this show kind of works organically. And like I said, most importantly, I love how people that have seen you many, many times on YouTube are getting to know a different side of you than maybe they normally do.
Sure.
So I think that this is awesome. If you could you do you think in any way that your travels, be it living in different countries or just kind of traveling around in general, has that influenced your reading at all?
Has it influenced my reading at all?
Maybe even to the extent of like meeting people in different countries that have recommended books that you may otherwise not have read.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe not. I mean, for I'm always jealous of people like young people these days, because being a nerd is cool now.
Oh God. Don't
You know,
even get me started.
when I was a kid, I would get beat up in school if people found out I was reading fantasy
Or playing D&D.
or
Yeah.
playing D&D or reading science fiction. But luckily, I was a big kid, so I didn't get beat up that much.
Yeah. Well,
But
I was not. And yeah, I was put into lockers more than I
I
like to
wasn't I
admit.
wasn't a tough kid, but I'm 6'1",
Yeah.
and I've been 6'1" since I was 12.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Like
Yeah.
I
No,
just had between 11 and 12, I shot up. I was a short, fat kid, and then all of a sudden I was the tallest kid in the class, and I was very thin.
gotcha.
So I was at least physically intimidating enough that not everybody who wanted to pick on someone would pick me. But has my travel influence? So what I meant about it's cool being a nerd. It used to not at all be cool being a nerd.
Right.
And you didn't just tell people I read fantasy.
Yeah.
You know, it was more like a shameful secret. You know, you did it
Sort
in
of.
quiet and didn't talk to anyone about it unless you knew that they were also into it. So I know for a fact that my travel has influenced me and how I think, and maybe how broad my ideas of the world are a lot. And I notice that when I have a long talk with someone who's never really traveled much.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because that's interesting. So where do you think, like, can you pull any specifics or things that you may otherwise not have come to some awareness of had you not traveled much, or had you been like the vast majority of people in the United States that for, whatever reason, just haven't traveled the world to know?
Poverty.
Yeah.
I had no concept of poverty. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we were like, middle class, upper middle class, maybe. But we had also, because of the embassy, we had always been maybe in a social class that we weren't actually in.
Sure.
We looked wealthier than we actually were.
Right.
Because the embassy pays for your house.
Right. There's a diplomatic thing that goes with it.
Yeah,
Sure.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I was a pretty privileged kid in that sense. I always lived in a good place. I was always safe. I always had something to eat, everything. And then I went to India.
Sure.
This is much later. I was 28, I think,
Okay.
when I went to India. And like the poverty in India is you don't have any concept of poverty until you've seen it. Like thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people living in huts with dirt floors, scrabbling from meal to meal kind of thing. I mean, it's really, really extreme. But also what was really interesting, I mean, this is also, we can get onto it later if you want. It's an important part of my life. I'm a Buddhist. I've been a Buddhist for a long time.
Yeah.
And I was traveling in India because of Buddhism.
Sure.
And when you're thinking about these things spiritually, maybe you notice different things. The poor people I met in India, and I met a lot of poor people in India because most people in India are poor.
Right.
Most of them are happier, or at least act a lot happier than middle-class people in America.
Yeah.
I had one particular experience which has stuck with me all my life. I went to get into a bus to go on like an 8-hour bus ride. Like travel in India is really challenging.
Yeah.
And I got in the bus, and just me, I'm like the size of 2 Indians.
Right.
And my backpack is the size of 1.
Right.
And I get in the bus, and it's a bus for 60 people, and there's already 80 people in there, and there's animals. People have brought a goat, somebody else has a chicken, and all of this is normal in India, not normal for me. And I was like, there's no fucking way I'm sitting on this
for 8
bus
hours. Yeah.
for 8 hours standing.
Yeah.
And I got off, and then I saw legs dangling over the top of the bus. And I said to the guy who was taking tickets and everything, I was like, oh, I'll sit up there. He's like, no, you can't sit up there. And I'd kind of gotten used to India, where there are a lot of weird ideas about what people can and can't do. And nobody's going to stop you, though.
Right.
They always tell you, no, you can't. And you just do it. And
they don't care. Yeah.
So I was like, dude, like, what's it cost to sit on top of the bus? I know you're going to rip me off for it, but it's going to cost less than sitting in the bus.
Right.
And I just climbed up there, plunked my backpack down, and sat on my backpack. And the guy came up. He told me how much it was. I gave him my money, I was waiting for my change, and he ran the length of the bus and jumped off the front of the bus and kept my
Oh,
money.
jeez.
I was like, yeah, okay, it's only rupees. Like
Yeah.
rupees compared to dollars are nothing.
Right.
So, he probably just stole like 75 cents from me. Not a big
Right.
deal. But I'm sitting up there with the untouchables. That's who sits on top of the
That's
bus,
who
like
sits on
the
top of the
lowest
bus. The
caste,
lowest cost. Yeah.
the poorest, like absolute dirt poor, unbelievably poor dudes sit on top of the bus.
So let me ask you this. Is it because they can't afford to be in the bus, or is it because the people in the bus don't want them in the bus, or is it both?
Both.
It's both.
Yeah, they are by their caste, they wouldn't be allowed to sit in the bus,
Hmm.
but there's no way they could begin to afford it either. And I
Right.
probably paid like 10 times what they paid to sit on top
Sure.
of the bus, even if
Right.
the guy had given me change.
Right. I mean,
Because
he knows his customers.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the bus starts going, and they're all actually pretty friendly. I mean, they don't speak a word of English. I didn't speak any of their languages. So we're just sort of smiling at each other. And then it starts raining. And I'm sitting on top of the bus in my waterproof modern Western jacket and with my modern waterproof backpack and everything. And I'm thinking, oh, this is horrible.
Yeah.
This is awful, and I'm really complaining in my head all I can. And all of these dudes on top of the bus start singing. And the guy
Really.
next to me taps me, and he's like trying to teach me the words. And I'm like, dude, fuck off. I'm suffering here. Can't you see?
Yeah.
And then another bus is coming the other way. And the guy next to me who wanted to teach me to sing, he's pointing at my hat. I'm like, dude, I have no idea what you're talking about. I have no idea what you're talking about. And then I see that he's holding out his very thin sort of wrap
Sure.
that he's wearing, and he's collecting water. And he's pointing at my hat, and he's pointing at his water, and he's pointing at my hat. And then I was like, I don't understand. I'm suffering. Fuck off. Leave me alone. And then when the other bus passes, the guys on top of the other bus and the guys on top of my bus throw water at each other and laugh their asses off.
It's just homemade entertainment.
And then it clicked in my head, and how I just thought, how stupid am I?
Yeah.
Like, I'm doing 1,000 times better than these guys, and I'm suffering because my head says I'm suffering,
Yeah.
and they have nothing,
Yeah.
and they're having a good time.
So where were you on your Buddhism journey? Because you use the word suffering, and that's just a key component of Buddhism, is in general. Where were you in that journey on that bus ride? Because were you consciously thinking, I am suffering during that ride, or is that something that you came to later in life as you reflected on it?
No, I was definitely a Buddhist already.
Okay.
I had started a Buddhist center, like a meditation center, with a friend. I'd mostly been taught by him, and then I was waiting to meet his teacher. And when I met his teacher, I went traveling with him and ended up in India. And so it was, for me, it was a trip to meet a number of Buddhist teachers that were related to the practice we were doing.
Sure.
But it was also, I was doing sort of the official Buddhist pilgrimage, going to all of the places where Buddha was born and achieved enlightenment and all of that stuff. And so I was it was pretty early. I'd been a Buddhist for a couple of years, I guess. But I guess I was already thinking in Buddhist terms in a way. I probably wasn't sitting there thinking, oh, this is suffering, because if I had
Right.
been,
You
I would
would
have
have.
thought other Buddhist thoughts and gotten over it a lot quicker.
Yeah.
It was when I realized that these guys were having a great time and I wasn't. And the only difference was I was richer and
Yeah.
our minds were doing different things.
Yeah.
Then all of the Buddhism clicked in, and I was like, yeah, this is actually a really good teaching.
I
Like, these guys are having the time of their lives.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here feeling horrible because I have decided to.
Yeah, I mean, that's a super powerful story. In that well, for one, it's obviously shaped the rest of your life because I mean, it's a key core memory that you've had, and just like you said, poverty as you've traveled the world and see how, the average person that you and I know would react to those types of conditions for more than a few hours versus essentially, generational, where their great grandparents were also, basically the untouchable caste that were in total poverty. And that's really all they ever knew. And for
There
all,
is no such thing in India as upward mobility. There
right.
kind of is now. Things have changed, but back then, like if you were poor, you had no choice but to accept it,
Yeah.
right? And I think I'm not saying that everybody who's in a bad situation should just accept it and shut up,
Right.
but I think that's a lot of the power of them being happy in situations
Right.
where we wouldn't be.
Yeah.
Is we are constantly in the West, we are constantly expecting better.
Sure. And
So we're never actually there where we are. We're always sitting there where we are, thinking of somewhere else.
right. I
You
mean,
know,
I think that when you ask most people, what do you want? They'll say, oh, to be happy. But it's sort of in some sense, for me at least, a conditional happiness where people will say, I want to be happy, but these are the conditions in which I
my
see.
happiness is dependent upon this and
Correct.
this and this and this.
This,
Yeah,
and this, and this,
yeah.
rather than, there's a lot of people that say, well, happiness is a choice and you can choose to be happy. And there's arguments for that. There's arguments against it, I think. But, but I really do respect and admire that you came to some of these decisions through spiritual kind of journeying, really, to
Took me a
figure
while.
out. Yeah,
Took me a while.
and not every day is a great spiritual day either. And I think that that's what, a lot of people who have gone on spiritual, types of personal quests, whether it be geographically, like you've done, where you travel the path of the Buddha and you've gone and seen all this with your own eyes and ate the food and smelled the terrible, body odor smells of an 80-person bus.
Got the dysentery.
Right. I mean,
I almost died in India.
oh my God. I'm glad you didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
Yeah,
not
me
sure.
too. Me too.
I'm going to say I very rarely speak for the chat, but in this case, I'll speak for the chat and say,
That was also a really good relativizing experience though, because like ever since then, like I was in a monastery in Bodh Gaya, just like nonstop diarrhea, just and ever since then, whenever I'm sick and I find myself thinking, "Oh, poor me, I'm so sick and whatever,"
mhm.
I always think back to that, and I'm like, it's not nearly as bad as that.
Oh yeah.
Like
Yeah.
this being sick, comfortable in my Western flat, and I've got food, and I've even got a friend who's going to take care of me, and all of that. I always look back at that, like, and my shower in that monastery, my shower was in the corner of my one room that I had, was a drain in the floor and a water tap on the wall.
Okay.
And my shower was fill up a bucket with cold water and dump it over my head.
That's it.
And it drains away into the corner.
Uh,
That was
Yeah.
it was horrible. It was the worst experience of my entire life. And ever since then, I'm always like,
I have a
I'm
shower.
not really that sick.
Yeah.
Things
Oh,
aren't really that bad.
yeah. So, I mean, I'm going to ask you about some books here in a minute, but I have to ask. So, that first time you did that shower, what was going through your mind? Because I would look at it and go, "Oh shit, this is what it is." Oh my God.
By that point, I was actually kind of used to it because I'd stayed in other monasteries and I'd stayed in places like there are basically three ways that I discovered to do India. You can either do it Western style, which means you're staying in a hotel that would be comparable to Western hotels,
Okay.
and you're probably paying half what you would pay for the same hotel in the West. And then you can do like backpacker style, which is, there are hostels and stuff like that, and they're primitive compared to hostels in the West, but they're not that bad. And then you can do it local style. And
Okay.
if you're going to monasteries, you're doing it local style. And if you're a Buddhist, you're probably going to monasteries because you want to be near Buddhists. So I did a lot of backpack style. I did a lot of local style. and the monasteries were all like that. You know, they don't have anything. They're actually very, very happy to have Westerners stay because Westerners pay.
Sure.
And like what you're paying is nothing, but
For
for
them, yeah.
them they need the donations, you know.
Sure.
So I was happy to stay in monasteries, but they're very primitive. And toilet in India is a hole in the floor.
Yeah.
Even if they have ceramics installed, it's still a ceramic hole in the floor. You're squatting, right?
Yeah.
Which just for any Westerner is super uncomfortable. Once you get used to it, it's actually much, much better. I won't go into the details of why because it's probably kind of disgusting, but
Yeah.
yeah. So I was kind of used to it by that point because my period with dysentery was kind of in the middle of the trip. I'd already stayed in some monasteries and I was already used to the conditions quite a bit, and I'd already taken a number of cold bucket showers. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's got to be just scary though, getting dysentery in India and just being so out of your element. And yeah, but I mean, it's certainly life affirming once you get over it, and you can look back and reflect on it. But I would imagine at the time I'd have been scared shitless if that
It's
happened
one
to
of
me.
I mean, it's I guess afterwards it's nice in a way because I can always look back, no matter how comfortable my life is, no matter where I am,
Hmm.
I can always look back at that and say, I survived that.
Hmm.
And it wasn't that bad. I mean, it was pretty bad. I guess maybe I'm remembering it not being that bad. It was pretty bad, but it's an experience I can say I've had that. I mastered that. Like I got through that. And it's nice to not always just have a comfortable life and never
Sure.
know whether whether it's actually possible for you to deal with that kind of thing. You know,
I think it makes you who you are, and which is obviously clearly one of my favorite booktubers. I'm on Sunday Pub every Sunday with you, not on camera because that's sort of my time to just
why
ab-
not? I
you
always
know
ask myself, why not?
you know I think there's a couple reasons. I think that the way that I booktube personally, I like the setup that I have here, and I think that if I come to Sunday Pub, it would be, and for those of you who are unaware, Matt does a program every Sunday, and it's usually like 2 p.m. Eastern States time, 1 p.m. my time, 11 p.m. Pacific time, and it's on his channel, Matt on Books. It's the Sunday Pub, and it's basically kind of half reading sprints, half just a bunch of friends and regulars getting together, talking about what they're reading, what they're up to. The topics can go all over the place. Um,
They always do.
they do. And I'm usually, almost every week in the chat. But like I was saying, I tend to like to, when I'm on screen, like to set it up the way that I have it set up right now. And if I do that, then it would mostly be just right from my laptop sitting on my couch. And if your guests won't mind, then maybe I will do that.
See, that was actually a thing for me. For those of you who don't know me and my channel, I used to do pretty regular videos like
Hmm.
Brian, just produced videos.
Hmm.
I haven't done that in a while. I'm having a bit of a break. I'll get back to it eventually. And for those, I have kind of a I'm only the German word is occurring to me. I have sort of a standard I want because I've
Yeah.
done video production.
Yeah. And
Um,
it's
and
really good, you guys. I mean, like for real, if you've not seen Matt's
go
recorded
back and look at some of
videos,
my videos. Like
yeah.
I understand lighting, I understand cameras. Um, I I started out because I just wanted to get started. I started out, my videos weren't that well produced. And I got to a point where I was like, okay, I've got some lights, I've got a good camera, I've got a good microphone. I like my setup, right? So I've got that. But for live things, I always want live things to feel easier than that.
Hmm.
And I think live is inherently more casual anyway.
Yeah.
So I have this setup, which is the exact opposite. Like it's literally the other side of the room where I shoot my other videos.
Yeah.
Over there is the big bookshelf that's behind me in my produced videos.
Yep.
And here is where I sit when I read. It's my desk. And it's got whatever in the background, sometimes fits, my cat. And I actually like that difference. I especially for the Sunday pub, I was like, there's no way that every Sunday I'm setting up
You're
all
gonna go
that shit.
right. I
You
mean,
know?
Matt and I have the same thing in common. We've talked about this where when we do recorded videos, like what you see right here, it's a schlep, right? I am moving lights from room to room.
Yeah.
Matt's clearing his whole entire desk off. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a production to do things the way that Matt and I like to do them. So yeah, I can absolutely see why you like to do the Sunday pub in a more casual manner, and in fact, it goes with the theme. You know, so I need to get over myself and just come on
Exactly.
camera
Get over
and
yourself, sit down anywhere you want, and
yeah,
just flip your laptop open and join the pub.
just join the pub. If for those people that maybe are unfamiliar with your reading taste, and I'm going to pivot back to some book talk here because I know lots of you guys are here for book talk, but you know, like I said, one of the purposes of doing this show is for you guys to get to know the people really behind the personalities on the camera, and we've talked about a lot of Matt's past and just life stuff. Let's talk about some books. Who are some authors, both in it could be sci-fi, it could be fantasy, it could really be anything that I think, or that you think kind of defined you as a reader, that you like to talk about, that you like to recommend to people, and that you're passionate about?
Yeah. Obviously Tolkien,
Sure. I
like,
was going to say besides him because we talked about him.
yeah, I mean, I just think he's the master in a lot of ways. I do realize that, writing, especially in fantasy, or yeah, not even especially in fantasy, writing in general has changed since the 1930s and 40s. Like,
I'd say so.
Yeah, people write differently. I can understand that some people might find Tolkien a bit slow or a bit boring in places or whatever. I just reread Lord of the Rings end of last year, beginning of this year, and I still think it's amazing.
Yeah.
And it's where our modern genre came from. Like Tolkien wasn't the first to write fantasy by any means,
No.
but he was the first who wrote a novel that is still readable today with today's sensibilities.
Sure.
And is still good,
Sure.
But other than him, it's weird. I went through a period, I think when I was in university mostly, and a bit after uni, I succumbed to the snobbery about the genre.
Really?
Yeah, totally. I read it when I was a kid, and then I thought, okay, I'm an adult now.
Sure.
Adults don't read this stuff. And I didn't stop reading, but I started reading more literary fiction.
Okay.
And a lot of it would still be called magical realism, probably, but I read a lot of Isabel Allende, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Peter Carey, who's an Australian author who's amazing, one of the few authors ever to win 2 Booker Prizes, and Paul Auster, who ended up being one of my favorite authors ever.
Okay.
And I haven't really talked about any of those.
Yeah, this is the first time I've heard you mention any of them.
I've mentioned Paul Auster because
Okay.
I did reread one of his books not too long ago, and I mentioned him on my channel a couple of times, but I've never really done like a review of a Paul Auster book or a Peter Carey book or anything like that. But I got really into those kinds of things. I was reading a lot of that. I read basically everything Paul Auster ever written. I think everything Peter Carey ever wrote, and a lot of Allende and Gabriel Garcia Marquez and all of that sort of stuff. And then I got back to fantasy at some point. I got over myself and said, wow, this is really stupid. Why would I not read books I love?
Yeah.
Who cares what anyone else thinks of it?
Yeah. And
Um,
nowadays, right, the prom queen is, buying advance tickets to Dungeons and Dragons movies. So had
I
we
was,
had
I
we
was,
only known, right?
this was like a redefining experience for me. I
Yeah.
was standing on a train. I think I was in Sydney at the time. I was standing on a train and I had my headphones on and I was, into my own thing, but I could hear the people next to me and two really typical business robot looking types were like, "Oh my God, did you see Game of Thrones last night?"
Yeah, right?
And I
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
"Where the fuck am I? On
Do you
what
know what I
planet?"
think happened? I think that the people that, like, we grew up with became movie executives and TV executives, and they, "You know what? We like this stuff, let's make it."
Yeah. Yeah,
I
exactly. People our age became professional nerds.
Yeah, and they basically created the nerd culture, to
Yeah.
be mainstream,
Yeah.
But anyway, I
Marvel
interrupted.
Marvel movies,
Right?
fantasy on
Oh my
TV.
god. If you would have told me that, like we were talking about this earlier, that some of the people I went to high school with would be fired up to go see a Doctor Strange movie, when I was 16 years old, I'd have said, This world is gonna be amazing. I cannot wait."
I had the coolest experience the other day. I was coming home after shopping, and out the front of my building was my housemeister, basically the building superintendent.
Okay.
And he was, cleaning up the sidewalk and whatever. And he's a really nice guy, but he's like it looks like he's ex-military. He's a really big, well-built dude, older as in my age probably. Um, and very, very working class kind of dude. Like his full-time job is in I think he works on cars in a garage. And he does the housemeister thing part-time. And I just stopped and was having a chat with him. Housemeister fled. And, how you doing, Fred? And, oh, yeah, I'm going on holidays soon and whatever. And he said, I've been meaning to ask you, actually, you've always struck me as someone who probably reads. And I'm like, yeah,
Okay.
actually, quite a
Yeah.
bit. Yeah. And he's like, I feel like I've read everything. And I laughed at him. I was like, Fred, you don't seriously think that you've read everything. I mean, I don't know how much you read, but I bet I read more and I haven't read everything. And he's like, no, I know I haven't read everything, but I always have a hard time finding something new. And I was like, well, what do you like? And he was like, well, the main thing I really like is science fiction.
Sure.
And I was like,
You have come to the right place, my friend.
I have to entirely reevaluate my picture of you now.
Right? Fred
Um,
is somebody totally new now.
I
Yeah.
was like, dude, okay, you like science fiction. Have you read Hyperion? He's like, no. I was like, fuck off and read Hyperion immediately.
Yes.
Like, if you think you've read everything in science fiction, you haven't read Hyperion. What the hell are you talking about? Go read
Yes.
Hyperion
And by
now.
and by the way, well done in getting Joanna to read Hyperion when you had your fireside chat, kind of select the TBR. For those of you that are unaware, Matt is one of the proprietors of the Fireside Discord, along with Josh from Red Fury Books and Joanna from Joanna Reads. And they did a program not that long ago where they selected a book for each of them to read, in the coming month. And Matt, like he said, selected Hyperion for Joanna, and she loved it, as everybody should love Hyperion. It's like,
It was hilarious actually.
yeah,
I got her list
yeah,
and I was just reading down the list. I think Hyperion was somewhere number 6. They weren't ranked or anything. It was
sure.
just like that was where it
You
happened to
probably
be.
just stopped right there.
And I read down it and there was like Ishiguro.
Yeah,
And I was like, damn, Ishiguro is one of my new favorite authors. And there was something else I can't remember. And I was like, oh man, yeah, that's also deciding between those two is hard. And then I got to Hyperion. I was like, nah, screw it. This is
yeah,
over.
it's got to
I'm not
be.
like, I don't care. It could be anything else on this list.
Yeah,
And I'm going to say Hyperion. So I don't even need to think about it.
yeah. I
It's so
totally
good.
agree. And
It's so good.
it's so funny because I'd never read the Canterbury Tales before. I'd heard about it, but it's like it was the first kind of book that I'd ever read that was basically a series of short stories that are all tied together in one overarching story.
And it's one-to-one the Canterbury Tales. Like I read the Canterbury Tales in school. And as soon as I started reading Hyperion, and we got into the first person's story,
Mhm.
I was like, is this Canterbury Tales?
Right.
And
Y
it's very much Canterbury Tales. I mean, of course, the tales that are being told are
Mhm.
completely different, but the structure is Canterbury Tales,
Yeah,
but only the first book.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Book 2 is totally different, and I
Yeah,
liked it, but for different reasons.
yeah.
So you mentioned Dan Simmons is obviously, an author that you like.
Hyperion
Obviously,
is my most recommended book ever. I've gotten so many people to read Hyperion.
yeah.
Otherwise, I mean, obviously,
I
because
know
I
you're a
talked
big
about it,
Malazan guy.
Stephen Erickson and
Yeah,
Ian C. Esselmont, but I've read much more Erickson than Esselmont. I that reading Malazan redefined fantasy for me. To put it maybe a bit more negatively, um, I often say Erickson ruined fantasy for me, because once you've read Malazan and fallen in love with it like I did,
yeah,
you look at everything else and you're like, yeah, it's all right.
sure.
You know, it's not bad. This kind of annoys me and this kind of annoys me, and it'd be better if he didn't do this when he wrote, and you know. Erickson's amazing. Like, Malazan is the most amazing fantasy story and world I've ever encountered. Nothing compares.
And it's funny because the people that I know that are passionate about this series, like you are, they're all very, very similar. Yeah, Philip obviously being, right there with it, just
Yeah.
being the top of his list as well. I'm starting Dead House Gates next week. So I think
Yes.
next week or in 10 days, something like that. I'm excited. I'm going to have to be taking an extended break, but it's interesting. You were somebody that I asked, I believe.
Hey,
Yeah, I did
Joe.
ask you. That, because John and I are going to be reading Wars, Light, and Shadow starting in January, and it kind of went out of schedule because I was planning to do a book of Malazan a month to get to the next 9 books. I've only read the first one. But I think it's going to be really hard to read that and Words Light and Shadow simultaneously. So I think I'd asked you and Jimmy Nuts, all right, if I can only read a certain amount of books before January, where's a good stopping point? And I think you both said after book 4, to
Yeah.
take a break. So
Yeah.
I'm very excited for that. And that's, and honestly, Malazan is
Before Midnight Tides, because Midnight Tides is the biggest change.
sure.
Like, they all change from book to book. It's like a different place and different characters, but Midnight Tides is a totally new place. No characters you've ever seen before, and it's the fifth book.
Yeah,
So
that's a good,
yeah, yeah.
that,
I think going up until what is it, House of Chains, end of
yeah.
House of Chains, and then taking a break makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hate taking breaks. It's like I don't like to do that. How do you feel on like series? Do you when you encounter something that you really like, do you take big breaks between books or do you just kind of plow through?
Booktube has really changed that in general.
Okay.
Because when you're booktubing, as opposed to just being a reader off by yourself, there's a lot of different pressures pushing and pulling you in different directions.
Oh,
And
yes,
and
there are.
yeah, and I mean, some of it is, I want to join a read along with my friends, but some of it is also just, I had a Sunday pub last week and someone recommended something that got me really excited. And
Sure.
you're constantly being pushed and pulled in different directions
There's a
with.
bit of FOMO as well, too.
There's a lot of FOMO. Like, somebody reads something, I don't really pay attention to or care much about what's new.
Sure.
But still, like, Jimmy Nuts was reading Julian May, and I went, I've never heard anyone talk about her. I've never heard anyone talk about the Pliocene books.
Yeah,
And I read those when I was a teenager, and damn, I want to reread those.
sure.
I immediately got really hype. I haven't started yet, but I really want to get back into those books. But yeah, there's always something like that. So I often get interrupted.
Yeah.
I will buy the entire series. I'll read the first book, buy the first book, read it. If I like it, I'll buy the entire series, and I won't do anything else until I'm done.
That's me. Yeah.
That used to be how I always read.
Same here. Yeah.
Recently, oh, that's easy, Thorol. I mean,
Hyperion.
were you listening?
Yeah.
Like,
Hyperion.
I'd recommend Hyperion before anything,
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah.
Sun Eater is good, but Hyperion is like you can't compare the two.
Well,
Um,
Sun Eater is an ongoing story. Hyperion is as well, but the books themselves are just really different
yeah, they're
from each
extremely
other.
different.
Yeah.
If I had to say better, I would say Hyperion much better.
Yeah.
Like no question. Like definitely read Hyperion. Also read Sun Eater. Sun Eater I really
Yeah.
liked. Sun Eater was an exception for me this year.
Yeah, you
Um,
went right through that, man.
I binged Sun Eater. I read the entire thing in like 6 weeks.
He did. You guys, like, it's
Um,
so funny. I would come on to Sunday Pub and troll Matt about when are you going to start Sun Eater? When are you going to start Sun Eater? And this is like when I'm like sort of just about to finish Demon in White, which is the third book, and he's finally all right. He's going to get to it. Matt blew right past me, and then I was like asking him questions
Brian,
after months of trolling.
can you put Joe's comment on the screen and then kick him? For anyone who might be tempted to listen to
Yeah,
Joe Byrne,
yeah,
don't.
yeah,
The sequels. Hyperion is 4 books. There's sort
yeah.
of 2 Hyperion books and 2 Endymion books.
Right.
They are all awesome. The first one is the best, I would agree,
Hmm.
but you should absolutely read the sequels because they are awesome. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of story stuff. Hey, Jared,
Jared,
there's a
oh,
lot of
one of my
story
favorite.
stuff that pops up in the first book, which isn't really dealt with in detail
Hmm.
because it's coming in later books, and it's awesome stuff. There are some really big things that come up in later books that you will want to know and read, and it's epic. So read all 4.
Yeah, and the truth is that Hyperion is a masterpiece, right? And I think it's difficult to write 4 masterpieces back to back to back to back.
Yeah,
And it can be that there's still very, very good books, but again, it's there's one Mona Lisa, right? So
there's also, I mean, just the fact that he decided that the structure of Hyperion was going to be the structure of Canterbury Tales
yeah,
makes it a unique book,
right,
right? Just
right.
purely because of that structure. And the rest of it is a much more normal structure where it's popping back and forth between different characters and whatever. And it doesn't have that structure that the first book had. So they are different, but they are very, very good.
Yeah,
It's worth reading all of them.
right. And it's not like Dan Simmons lost any skill level, right, as an author
Yeah.
between them. I mean, it's the same writer. The way that he composes a story is fantastic. Out
Yeah.
of curiosity, for the people that are watching that have read Hyperion, which is your favorite story within it?
Oh yeah, that's easy for me.
Is it the
Scholar
priest tale or the scholar? It's got to be
Scholars
one of them. Scholar.
Scholar's Tale. Yeah.
Same here.
Just because I found the Scholar's Tale the most moving emotionally.
Same here.
I think
Yeah.
the Priest Tale is maybe the most interesting,
Yeah.
just because of what's going on and
And the
how that story
twists and
hooks into everything else.
yeah.
But the Scholar's Tale in the first book is definitely the one that I just, well, man.
Yeah. I mean, I remember finishing that chapter and just going, oh my God. And you and I are very similar in the sense that we are not emotional readers. We don't cry when we read books.
No,
I think
no.
you and I are the only two that are like
I wish
that.
I did. I wish I did.
Same here.
It seems like there's a very cathartic release in reading something really emotional and getting to the point where you're actually crying, but it just doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen for me either. It doesn't happen
I'll-
for me in life or books. So
no,
it's just we're not criers. Hey, it makes us an anomaly. Probably not in a healthy way, but we are who we are. But I think if I was
old school toxic masculinity.
that's right
us.
for the
That's us.
win for the loss for a series of ongoing depressions over the years. Absolutely.
Yes, exactly.
But I mean, if there was a story that I have read in the last 25 years that would have moved me to tears, it certainly would have been The Scholar's Tale.
Yeah, and also a number of things that Robin Hobb has written.
Sure. Yeah. Same
Robin
here.
Hobb, I mean, you were asking, I never really answered this. You were asking about like favorite authors.
Mhm.
Robin Hobb is way up there.
Same.
I love the Dune books, all 4 of them. Beyond 4, I wouldn't bother, but the first 4, even though they're all very, very different,
Mhm.
I love those books, and I've read them multiple times. I read God Emperor of Dune the first time when I was 14, and
Jeez.
I think that was a mistake.
Ah,
Um, I'm just looking at my shelf. Gene Wolfe.
yes, you and I are
Um,
both big Book of the New Sun advocates for sure.
yeah, I mean, one of the other Evie, Evie, I don't feel qualified to say Simon Jimenez until I've read The Vanished Birds, which I'm doing very soon. And then after that, considering that will be his entire bibliography, then I might say Simon Jimenez. But yeah, actually, that relates to the next point I was going to make. You and I are both people who consciously seek out and enjoy reading difficult books.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of stuff I read, it's purely enjoyment.
Hmm.
But I really, really enjoy also reading a book that is challenging.
Yes.
Reading a book that has a bizarre structure, or reading a book that has difficult language. Like I enjoy reading Le Morte d'Arthur, which was written in the 15th century in 15th century style English, which isn't easy, but it's
Sure.
the Arthur story, and I love it. I like reading Shakespeare. I haven't done much Shakespeare reading in a while, but I like reading Shakespeare because he was an incomparable master of the English language,
Right.
and it's difficult. Like the language
It
is
is.
difficult.
You're right. We both have that in common, that we like challenging material and we seek it out. I mean, I don't know what it is. I mean, do you feel like was there a book that you felt like was the first one that you read that you thought was like super challenging, and then when you finished it, it was like, oh, I like challenging books.
Book of the New Sun.
Book of the New Sun.
I
Yeah,
read Book of the New Sun the first time, I think, when I was in my 20s, early 20s.
sure.
And it was super challenging for me. It was nothing like any fantasy I'd ever read before, or science fiction. And I came out of it thinking I had understood about half of it,
Hmm.
but I loved it. I was like,
Yeah.
I don't even know exactly what it is with this book, but a lot of people say that when they read Gene Wolfe, they feel stupid because he's obviously using all sorts of references that you don't get.
Right.
I usually felt smarter after reading Gene Wolfe because there were some references I did get
Sure.
and some I didn't, and some things I looked up, and I felt like I learned something, you know?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
and I think that, and I think it was a video that I made last week, and I was talking about rock climbing. And then when you hit the summit of a rock climbing, even though I'm not a rock climber, I feel like, and I think it was a video about big books, that when you finish a big book, there's a sense of accomplishment. I think it's very similar to books that are, pretty regarded as challenging types of books. And Book of the New Sun for me was absolutely that. Now, I will say, for those of you that are watching that haven't read Book of the New Sun, but you've thought about it, you've been intimidated, whatever, if you have an e-reader and you do read ebooks, I suggest the first read there, because Gene Wolfe does not make up any words, but he uses very archaic words on almost every page of the book. And simply by pushing that word on a Kindle reader, and it'll bring up a dictionary, and it'll say something like an 8th century term for a soldier that used to hold a halberd and wore a hat.
But a number of times you push on that word and the dictionary won't know it. If you really want to understand Gene Wolfe,
The
I can
compendium.
recommend
Yeah.
a secondary book,
Yeah.
a help book called Lexicon Earthus,
Okay.
which is a complete dictionary of all of the words he uses that are
There
no
you go.
longer in common usage. That is one of the things I find super interesting about Gene Wolfe. Like, we're all fantasy readers, and we all are used to running into new vocabulary,
Yeah.
right? That author has made something up, or it came from mythology, like even Tolkien back then, like nobody in the 40s knew what an orc was.
Right.
So like we're used to finding all of this vocabulary, but Gene Wolfe didn't make up a single word. Even though he uses a lot of vocabulary you will not recognize, because he's gone back into Latin, he's gone back into old German, old Spanish language, old French, whatever. and he's pulled all sorts of words that were in use, but maybe not for the last 400 years.
Right.
And
Exactly.
but he's also then, tricky bastard, he's also then using those words for something that isn't what they used to be used for.
Yeah.
Sometimes, sort of. So it took me a long time to realize that the horses in Book of the New Sun are not horses.
Yeah.
Right? He calls them destriers, and a
Yeah.
destrier is a kind of warhorse from history. And I was like, oh, I'm smart. I know something about history.
Sure.
I know what a destrier is. And then he describes them having claws. And I was like, wait a sec.
Yeah. Horses don't have claws.
Horses don't have claws.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff like that where even if sometimes he's using religious symbolism or whatever, and you may not get that because you just don't have the background.
Sure.
But the thing that always made me feel smart is there's a lot of details in the book, in the story itself, that don't depend on those kind of references, where if you're putting the pieces together as you're going along, you discover things. You realize what you thought or what you pictured. I'm a very visual reader. What you pictured in your head isn't the thing, because he drops little hints along the way, and you're like, horses have claws. Okay, maybe I need to rethink what destriers in this book are.
Right. And the one thing that I noticed about him that was a little bit similar in when I read To Ride Hell's Chasm by Jenny Words is that you've got these ongoing questions, and both of those authors will answer your questions, but they don't do it in just this big bombastic reveal kind of a way. They just sort of casually answer this question in the middle of a paragraph, that if you're not paying attention.
Erickson is the same way.
Yeah, if you're not paying attention, you just blow right by it because there's not a lot of pomp and circumstance about, some big great reveal. Now, Gene Wolfe might do that several chapters or even in the next book, where Janny Wirtz, at least in the one book that I've read, did it like maybe 3 pages later. So there's not like a whole long big wait, but they're just subtle answers that you had no idea. And you're like, oh, okay. Very cool. So challenging books. And I'm glad that you mentioned Gene Wolfe, because it's really been one of my big missions. Doug, I have to throw Doug's comment on here. Doug is like one of my favorite members of the Belltube community. As a sometimes rock climber, I can say that climbing a big rock is mostly pain, but having climbed a big rock is kind of sublime. Yeah, Doug is my Sherpa.
I have to do this so that Evie won't hate me and we can stay friends.
What is Shakespeare?
No, Fitz.
Oh, Fitz. Oh. I can't see you, so I have no idea.
Yeah, that's right. No, I'm just holding up Fitz, which Fitz hates. So go back to sleep, Fitz.
Yeah, I that's very, very cool. If anybody has, made me contemplate getting a cat, it's you. Just because like I said, I think we have some similarities in our lifestyles and our
Fitz
living situations.
Pretty awesome. I can recommend. I mean, from everything I've heard, I've never owned a Maine Coon before, but from everything I've heard, Maine Coons have in general a particular personality, and a lot of what I've heard other people say about Maine Coons has proven true with Fitz. So they're pretty cool cats, as long as you don't mind a cat that is somewhat of a challenge to pick up, because they're damn big.
Sure.
And she's still growing.
Let me ask you this question. We'll probably wrap it up relatively soon, folks, but I have a question for you, and this question is coming. You knew it was coming for months. When can we get more Matt on Books recorded?
You were going to ask me that.
Videos, because I just think you're so damn good at doing them. I know there's sometimes a pain in the butt to do, and I know sometimes you kind of think, is it worth doing it or whatever? But man, you talk about a content creator that I don't miss a video drop. Matt on Books is one of those creators. I've never missed a video
Thank you very much.
that you've put out. And I always learn something. It might be in the information that you put forward about what you're talking about. It might be from a booktuber's perspective, where I'm looking at your lighting and I'm looking at the angle of your camera and I'm looking at your sound and I'm going, man, Matt really has this dialed in. There's never been a video that you've made that I haven't learned something from. So I beg to ask, when? I've
been thinking about it lately. I mean, I've been very, very open about this, and I don't mind being open about it. In fact, Tori is probably the person who inspired me most to be very open about it.
Mm-hmm.
Mental health.
Yeah.
Everybody's favorite subject. I've had a problem with depression all my life.
Yeah.
It's come and gone in various times and for various reasons. And I had a break, I think about 5 months long last
Mhm.
year, which was primarily also caused by that, where I guess I was like, depression for me primarily manifests as a lack of desire to do anything,
Sure.
which when you're working, I'm not working at the moment.
Yep.
When you're working, that's especially hard because you have to do one thing at least.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of your energy to have any kind of motivation to do anything goes into that. And that was sort of what was happening last year. And it requires, with depression also, I think a lot of it with me is also just self-judging. Like, you suck and you can't do that. Nobody wants to see your videos anyway, and that kind of stuff.
Just
And
and the one thing is that I've learned in dealing with some similar issues is that when you live by yourself, you don't have a very good internal lie detector. And these thoughts that you either say to yourself or that you say out loud, there's nobody next to you saying bullshit, you
yeah,
know?
you're so bullshit. Shut up. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I have an awesome cat now who
Hmm.
makes me laugh at least once a day,
Awesome.
which helps. But yeah, she doesn't talk much. So I can't tell her the stupid things I'm thinking and she says bullshit.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, you're right. Being single and living alone doesn't really help.
Right.
Um, so I've been in a phase where I've been having a really hard time getting the motivation together to do a video. I've been very proud of myself that I have actually consistently almost every Sunday done a Sunday pub.
Yeah.
And that's been a good not really replacement, but like alternative
Hmm. It
that
stays
I don't,
connected. Yeah.
I don't feel like I'm completely out of it
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy, like, there have been weeks where the only thing I'm looking forward to is a Sunday pub.
Sure.
I really enjoy the regulars. I really enjoy the conversations, the people who turn up on screen. And I mean, a lot of the times it's Raf and Britain, which is
Hmm.
awesome, but often it's like surprises as well. And
Sure.
I really encourage anybody to surprise me with that. I don't know if people really get it because it's kind of a weird format, but
Right.
the idea is that it's open for anyone. Vero, who was in the chat, who is just a viewer, so to speak, not a booktuber, she popped on a
Yeah. I
couple of
loved that.
times.
That was great.
Jeroen has been on a couple of times. Other people, I mean, Evie obviously has been on
Hmm.
many times.
Sure.
And I really, really enjoy that part of it. That is the part, the social part, the meeting people and talking to them about books part is the part that I always most liked anyway.
Right.
Allegedly Evie joins. Yeah.
Yes.
She doesn't join that often anymore.
Yeah.
And we're gonna have a talk about that. But
Absolutely.
yeah. No, so it's interesting. I actually have been looking at Jimmy Nuts lately.
Hmm.
Like, sort of moved into this more vlogging
Yeah.
format. And I've been thinking I might actually, thank you, Rogue. It's a pleasure to be good crack. I've actually been thinking of doing something like that
Yeah.
because the review thing doesn't, I mean, even though they're usually the most produced, highest effort, most researched,
Right.
everything, like, you put everything into doing a
10 out
review
of 10. Yeah.
and they get
Yeah.
no response.
Yeah.
They get extremely little over time. Like, I still get comments sometimes on a review I did a year and a half ago.
Well, for sure. Because somebody just
And
read the book and they're now
yeah,
looking up on
exactly.
YouTube what
Exactly.
other people thought.
But I think the vlog thing with a little less production value, a
Mhm.
little less dragging everything out, big deal,
Mhm.
and a little more casual. Hey, this is what I'm reading, and this
Mhm.
is what I, whatever. Um, maybe that will be coming back in that format soon
Cool.
ish.
I hope you do, because I think, like I said, you're excellent at describing your experience with books without ruining them for people that haven't read them before, and not everybody has that skill.
It's
So
funny. I got I got a comment recently on my Lord of Light review, which was my book of the year last year. Roger's Lasny, Lord of Light. It has a lot to do with Buddhism and whatever. And it was a tradition with all of the reviews I did. I always start with what's it got, and I
yeah,
do that sort of bullet point list.
yeah.
And somebody commented, um, "Video says non spoiler starts with spoilers." And then I was like, I I
Yeah,
don't necessarily want to have a conversation about what is spoilers and what isn't, but I have a very broad definition of, or a very specific definition of spoilers, and a very broad acceptance for things that don't spoil. And to me, a spoiler is something that actually spoils something,
right.
right? I mean, it seems kind of obvious, but if there's a big twist, there's a big surprise, there's a big unknown mystery or something in the book, if I explain that to you in a video, that's a spoiler.
Mhm.
If I tell you that there's a person called George in the book,
That's not.
it doesn't spoil anything.
Right.
I don't know that it spoils anything. If I tell you that there are awesome fight scenes in the book,
Doesn't spoil
that
anything.
doesn't spoil anything. And people have gotten really weird about spoilers. Like, just for all you young people out there, when Brian and I were in our 20s, the word spoilers didn't exist.
Right. There was nothing called spoilers,
No.
you
I mean, there
know?
was also no internet, so you couldn't like
Y
put something out on the internet and ruin it for everyone.
Yeah, it's like it's so funny. Like I'm a big House of the Dragon fan on Max, and
Oh my God.
I've not read the book because I intentionally didn't, because I had
I've
already I read
I've
a
read
Song
the
of
book and I'm still loving it. I mean, the show is so hot. Damn.
it's so good, and I intentionally didn't read the book because I read all the Song of Ice and Fire before Game of Thrones series, ever aired an episode, and I just wanted to experience it for the
Yeah.
first time without knowing. Same with Shogun. It's like Shogun, I read the book before the show came out, and I just wanted to try something a
It's
little bit
interesting
different.
though, specifically with uh Fire and Blood
Yeah,
and with House of the Dragon. Fire and Blood is a history.
right,
It's not a story in the
right.
normal, like it's not a normal novel kind of story in the way that we're used to reading. It's a history. And in the history, first of all, there's a lot of things which are potentially really important, which aren't gone into in any detail. And there's a whole bunch of things that are vague and contradictory, because there are three different history people who are referenced in the book. There's a main maester who's writing it.
Okay,
There's Septon, who they refer to Septon Eustace all the time, who said this happened this way, but I think it happened this way. And there's Mushroom, who is the fool in the court. He's not in the show at all, but he's the
okay,
fool in the court. And he tells the wildest stories, right? And but the maester writing it references Mushroom stories as well. And he says, Mushroom says that actually what happened is blah, blah, blah. Of course, that's ridiculous,
right.
but he still puts it in there. So it's interesting, because when you're doing a TV show like House of the Dragon,
Yeah,
you have to choose.
you got to pick a path, right?
You can't
Choose
have
your own
all of these
adventure, right?
different things. So they
Yeah,
have to choose one of the stories, or maybe something that's a bit different. And they have changed a lot of things a little bit, you know.
sure.
There are a lot of I mean, I know certain things are coming up,
Yeah.
but I'm not 100% sure exactly how they're going to go, because there are a couple of things that they've done a bit differently that sort of surprised me, and I'm cool with that. I like that, you know.
I love it. Let me ask you, and again, you've been on BookTube for a while, and I ask people this kind of a lot, and then, folks, I promise we'll wrap it up pretty quick. But um, if somebody was going to start a channel for the first time, do you have thoughts on kind of the think about this and don't worry about that kind of, advice, because you've made enough videos, you've been on booktube, you've seen enough booktube, you've got the technical know-how down, you've made enough different types of videos. If someone was getting started and they're watching this and they're thinking about doing it, what do you say to them?
Just start.
Just start.
That would be the main thing. I mean, one of the things I did when I started is I very consciously said to myself, I'm going to do 20 videos and I'm not going to worry about how they are or how many views they're getting or if anyone's commenting or anything until I've done 20 videos. After I've done 20 videos, I'll stop and I'll evaluate.
Mm-hmm.
But YouTube is not like, if you're writing a book, the book you're writing is really important and you want it to be a success and it really means something. If you're creating a YouTube video, it's so unimportant, right? The thing that's important, the only thing that's important is the newest video you made.
Right.
Right. And if you keep making videos, then you get beyond the first one pretty quickly. Like
Absolutely.
if you start making videos and you do 1 or 2 a week, you're going to be far away from your first video pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And nobody cares about the video you made a month ago.
It's true. Or a week ago. I mean,
or even a week ago. Like,
our attention spans, because there is so much
Yeah.
content out there.
And
Yeah.
like compared to, I think around 20 videos, I got sort of the look that I used for a long time and then I've been using. But to me, like that look, I know it's pretty good because I know lighting, I know cameras, I know how to do that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then I look at my first video and it's embarrassing to me.
Yeah.
But it's only embarrassing to me because nobody else has ever looked at it.
Yeah.
Like, it's just not interesting to most people. Nobody. I mean, yeah, somebody might go back and look through your old catalog. Now that I've said that, people are probably going to scroll back and look at my first video.
Absolutely.
Just so they can have a hard time. That's fine.
Yeah.
But it's like, if you keep making videos, they will automatically get better. Right? Because you will be more comfortable because you've done it more. You maybe have an idea how to do your lighting that you didn't have when you started, etc. So the only thing I would say is just start with your fucking phone.
Mm-hmm.
There's a guy who is booktube famous and has thousands more subscribers than I do who still records on his fucking phone.
Correct.
Look, Chase.
Correct.
And the real thing that I think, the thing that I think is most important in videos that will engage people is personality.
Mm-hmm.
And all you can do, I mean, the cool thing about the internet is that there is a potentially infinite audience. Like every imaginable audience in the entire world could be watching your videos.
That's right. I mean, there's billions of viewers a day.
Exactly. Like, and they're everywhere and they have a million different kinds of interests and everything. So don't try and make a video that is like Mike or like Philip or like Jimmy Nuts or like Brian. Try to make a video that's like you. Try and let your personality, like, and this requires making a number of videos. So you get comfortable in front of the camera, you start feeling out what you really want to talk about and how you want to talk about it, what your style is. But generally, I would say just be yourself and it will appeal to someone because there are so many viewers out there. Be yourself, talk about things you're passionate about. Don't worry about the numbers. Don't worry about production quality. Don't worry about any of that stuff to start with. Just try and let your personal passion and your personality show and just keep doing it for a certain amount of time. I think it's a really good idea. Promise yourself you're going to do X videos total and X videos per week, whatever it is. Maybe it's 1 every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's 2 every 1 week, whatever. Try and promise yourself that at the beginning and just do it.
I love it. We're gonna get to the famous part of the episode here in a second, but before we do that, I want to thank everybody who's been part of chat today. This is such a unique experience for me. I have absolutely first of all, I love Matt, so I can sit and talk to Matt for 2 more hours, no problem. Um, but this has been really cool. I've not done a live stream during the daytime before. And again, if you are somebody who's watching in Europe, or you're somebody who maybe in America is watching this on your lunch break or whatever, if you like to see more videos at this time of the day, drop it in the comments and I will make this happen. Again, Matt's, channel is listed in the description, of course. And I do recommend, if you are new to Discord, or if you're familiar to Discord and you're not already a member of the Fireside Discord, Matt and Josh's and Joanna's Fireside Discord is awesome. It's definitely one of my top three favorites that I go to. If you've liked this video, hit the thumbs up button. It helps more people see the channel. If you're not subbed to my channel, and if you're not subbed to Matt's channel, I don't even know what you're doing. Subscribe
What's
to
wrong
both.
with you?
Right? There's serious problems that we don't have the time to get into if you've not. I want to let everybody know next week we are off of For Whom the Bell Tolls, but there will be 2 videos. In fact, I'm actually doing 2 videos plus a live stream every week, excepting generally the last week of the month where I don't do a live stream. But 2 weeks from today, at sort of the normal time that we've been doing them, I've got a guest coming on that I am very intrigued to talk about and to talk with, because the dude is so opposite of me in almost every regard that I can tell. I had to invite him on the show because I got to get to know this dude. His name's Jonathan Cohn. He's got thousands of subscribers on YouTube, but personality wise, lifestyle wise, all this stuff, man, I think him and I are, like, I'd put Matt and me as, simpatico,
Got a lot in common, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, so much in common. Jonathan Cohn and I don't know if we have anything in common. So I think it's going to be an awesome episode. That's 2 weeks from today. Now,
also,
yes,
if I can promote just briefly a little.
yes, please.
I am also on Tori's channel. Tori does
yes.
Motley Crue chats. I'm on her channel on Saturday.
Oh, awesome. Well, this is good because
Go look her up.
Now I have something to do on Saturday. Do you know what time it is?
It's my time, if I remember correctly. It's my time, 8 p.m., which is 2 p.m. EST.
Perfect. I have a daytime something to do on Saturday. If you guys want to hang out with me and chat, I will be there for sure. Now, we end every episode on BellTube, whether it be our live streams or whether it be the pre-recorded, with a segment that we call One for the Road. And I love these live streams because it gives me the opportunity to ask our guest to provide the one for the road. And we've had some absolutely fantastic ones. Almost everyone that I can think of, actually all of them, have been very valuable in some regard. Some are more esoteric in nature. Some have been more on the practical side, but all of them have been valuable. So Matt, from Matt on Books, live from Berlin, Germany, if you would you provide us a one for the road today?
Sure. I'll go back to something we were talking about earlier. I was talking about my experience on top of the bus in India, and also just sort of as a very basic concept in Buddhism, that I would say it's really good to keep in mind that no experience that you have is inherently good or bad. It is potentially possible to enjoy anything, and it's all happening in your mind. You can see it really easily. You can find someone who's been through something you've been through, which maybe was really bad for you, which wasn't nearly as bad for them, or even was good for them because they just see things very differently. Your mind determines your experience. And having your mind in a certain place, thinking about things a certain way, can completely change your experience. It's not up to external conditions to define how you experience what you go through. And it's all happening up here. So it's definitely possible. I mean, I've been really, really lucky to know some people who are actually, I would say, enlightened, and go through some things with them. And I'll be standing next to them in exactly the same situation, and I'm having a really horrible time and they're laughing.
Sure.
So that really proved to me quite conclusively that like no experience has to be a bad experience for you. You know,
It's all how your mind is going to
your mind can make
interpret
it
it.
into anything, and your mind is what makes it a horrible experience. And your mind can then also make it a less horrible or even enjoyable experience.
I think that's an awesome one for the road. And again, I think what you've done there is really cool because I had just talked about kind of the general esoteric type of one for the roads and the more practical one for the roads, and I think that strikes a great balance. There,
Esoterically practical.
it is, but that's what you get when you get guys our age. You guys, is all this untapped wisdom ready to come at you in the middle of the afternoon in the States and at a reasonable hour in Europe time. Matt, I want to thank you for being such an amazing guest. This is way long overdue. Folks, like I showed you at the beginning, right? I prepare questions for our guests. There are
We got
20
through like 3 of those.
there are 20 questions on this list. We hit 4 of them. So, Matt, I have a question. Would you be willing to be a repeat guest on For Whom the Bell Tolls? Because I have 16 questions we haven't got to yet.
Since I named it,
Yeah.
I kind of think of this as my show anyway.
Oh, fair enough. I mean,
So I'd be happy to come back anytime, of course.
Thank you. I expect a copyright strike from you any day now, and same with Jimmy Nuts for using
Yep.
his likeness in several videos. You guys, thank you for being part of this. If you've been here live, again, it really does add some life to our show. Sure, if you're watching on a replay, it's awesome to have you, tune into a couple of hours of essentially what's a great podcast. And I just have a blast with this. I never thought I would, but it's great. Matt, you rock. I can't wait to have you back on. And yeah, I will see Matt on Saturday on Tory Talks, which you should absolutely be at, and definitely join in the Sunday pub this coming Sunday and see what it's all about if you are new. All right, everybody. I will see you guys in a regular video later this week. And For Whom the Bell Tolls, we'll be back in 2 weeks with the one and only Jonathan Cohn. Until then, I will see you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks everybody in the chat.